As religion struggles to stay afloat in many parts of the West, a rising tide of devotion is surging through the Islamic world. Many Muslims are coping with modern life by turning to the age-old certainties of their faith. But once they turn to religion, they have to ask themselves a question as old as Islam itself. Who decides what it means to be a good Muslim in the modern world?
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Islam's never had a pope or a priesthood, but it's always had its wise men, the scholars. Their job is to translate the Quran and the way of the Prophet into rules that Muslims can live by. But that's not so easy when life keeps changing. Take one example from the past. Coffee wasn't around in the Prophet's time, but by the 16th century it was all the rage in Arab cities. And it left the scholars deeply divided. They just couldn't agree whether this strange new brew was haram or halal, forbidden or allowed. Things got so bitter that rival mobs were fighting pitched battles around the coffee houses of Cairo. But eventually the coffee fans won out because they were able to show the popular will was behind them. They were able to invoke what would become a key principle of Islamic law, consensus. To paraphrase the Prophet, if the community agreed on something, it couldn't be wrong. 6 centuries later, finding consensus in a global community of 1.3 billion Muslims is proving impossible.
There is no Muslim Pope, there is no Muslim Vatican. If somebody has a loud enough voice, someone like bin Laden for that matter, then they can very easily set themselves up as a spokesperson for Islam.
When I see young women walking in the cities of Europe and they are half naked, they have a lot of tattoos on their bodies, and I ask myself, do they really choose this way of life? Are they really aware of what they are doing? Do they really think that this is freedom?
How do I justify it? I don't, and I don't have to justify myself and my existence to anybody.
Those struggling to reform Islam are locked in a battle with those who want to revive its core values. And what's at stake here is far more than a set of beliefs. This conflict will shape the future of more than 1 billion people and each and every society they live in.
You must be looking forward to getting into your new offices.
Yeah, definitely. It's much more advanced.
Islam Online is the biggest Muslim website in the world. The staff at its Cairo head office are drawn from all corners of the globe. Islam Online may be all multinational and modern, but it's designed to keep Muslims rooted in tradition. And one of its most effective tools is the cyber fatwa. The word fatwa may be sinister to some in the West, but it's simply a scholar's opinion on any given subject.
This is not actually only the fatwa section, but it is a shara'i section that incorporates fatwas and other shara'i related issues. Okay. Shara'i, comes from the sharia, the Islamic law.
Every day, Islam Online receives hundreds of requests for fatwas from around the world. And there's no limit to the subjects the online scholars have to cope with.
We have 3,425 fatwas here.
And they're very detailed, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
Valid reasons for divorce,
yeah.
Marriage and divorce to obtain a green card.
Yeah.
Wow, these are really our 21st century problems. This is incredible. So we have different questions. Does Islam accept women's curses?
Yeah. Clipping fingernails.
Clipping fingernails. What's amazing is you have people asking questions on everything from fundamental issues about their relationships with their husband or wife, to clipping fingernails, to a whole range of subjects.
Yeah, we answer all questions we receive,
I think this reflects the fact that Islam is a way of life, incorporates everything, even regarding your fingernails, even regarding your personal matters. It has to be conducted in the good, healthy way which Islam states and asks us to follow.
But isn't it very difficult, I suppose, to say what is Islamic in the 21st century on many things that didn't exist back in the Prophet's day? That must be a real difficulty, updating the message to
And this presents a challenge to the scholars, that they have to study more about Islam and about how Islam should deal with all those circumstances wherever they are. And this is how Islam adapts, and this is how Muslim scholars are trying also to adapt, and they should.
Islam Online is an electronic pulpit used by the scholars of the Muslim establishment to maintain order and control at a time of great change. The website's spiritual mentor is Yusuf al-Qaradawi, perhaps the most influential conservative scholar in Islam today. His influence stretches all the way to Dublin's Islamic Centre, which is headquarters for his European Council for Fatwa and Research. But that doesn't mean he's the only voice that Irish Muslims are listening to, as we discovered when we met Khalil Al-Kadul.
Hi Kieran, how you doing? Alright, thanks. Good to see you. How you doing, guys?
Like so many young Western Muslims, Khalil's life is shaped by many forces. His family originally come from Iraq, but he was raised in England before moving to Dublin, where his father is director of the Islamic Centre. After studying at the Dublin Business School, Khalil set up his own contract cleaning service.
Morning, Joe. How you doing?
Morning.
Hey, how are we getting on?
That's the list of the reports.
Okay.
Khalil sees no conflict between his modern life and Islamic tradition, but where he needs guidance, he still looks to the scholars.
The scholar would be somebody senior who we would, go to for information that's not necessarily available in books. There's a lot of touchy subjects, and they have the information basically. They've done the reading, they've done the homework, they've worked very hard, and they understand the religion. Now, scholar to scholar could differ. It's different. I mean, in the time of the Prophet, people differed. With the Prophet even.
There's a new kind of scholar in Islam, and Khalil got to meet him on a recent trip to Ireland. Amra Khalid is Islam's first global evangelist, the Muslim Billy Graham. He uses television, text messages, and the internet to win a bigger audience than any Western broadcaster, even Oprah Winfrey.
Do you know the pioneers of high schools in the Arab world? 90% of them girls, not boys. But if I asked you where these girls will be after they finish their college, disappear. Why? Because the system in our countries cannot accept women as leaders.
I mean, I think he's amazing. He's a great inspiration for young people like myself. You feel that he's talking to you, and he communicates to everybody in their level as well. He would be a reference for the likes of myself or any, Joe Soap. I can't really say Joe Soap, but I mean, Muslim, any Muhammad, if you want to,
At the heart of the Amra Khalid phenomenon is a change in style, if not substance. He's an Islamic scholar, but he looks like a TV star. He preaches a traditional vision of Islam, but appeals to young Muslims who've lost faith in the old order. But some Muslims believe that no scholar, no matter how modern, should dictate the course of Islam's future. In Amsterdam, we met one of the most outspoken Muslims alive today, Irshad Manji. A feminist, a lesbian, and a dissident, she was once described by a Muslim leader in her native Canada as a bigger criminal than Osama bin Laden. What puts her in the firing line is her belief that no one has a divine right to interpret the word of God.
The main Muslim leader, based in Baghdad and known as the Caliph, cracked down politically, closed ranks to maintain the unity of the empire. And within a few generations, that meant that Baghdad oversaw the closing of something else, ijtihad. Islam's tradition of independent thinking and reasoning. 135 schools of thought that flourished in the early centuries of Islam were deliberately whittled down to only 4 pretty conservative schools of thought. This led to a rigid reading of the Quran and also to a series of legal opinions, what we now call fatwas, that scholars could no longer overturn or even question, but could now, on pain of execution, only imitate. And that is what we Muslims today are struggling with, that for the next 1,000 years to this very day, Muslim scholars have been repeating each other's medieval theories without much introspection or self-criticism or reflection. The beauty of emphasizing ijtihad is that I'm not asking my fellow Muslims to import a foreign tradition or an alien virtue into the faith, not at all. I'm reminding them that Islam itself once exhibited this progressive pluralistic practice, and that there is no reason, save for pure politics, we cannot have it again.
Irshad Manji's take on Islamic history is still a minority view, but she does raise a genuine dilemma for Muslims. What happens when your personal opinions clash with accepted Islamic practices? For many Muslim women, this is the defining question in Islam today. At first glance, the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur, mixes old and new, east and west, with deceptive ease. But the growing influence of Islam in politics has tested this country's cosmopolitan image. Almost 20 years ago, the country introduced a system of Islamic law, or Sharia. It was supposed to run parallel with civil law and apply only to Malaysia's Muslim majority. But it's also given conservative scholars a chance to undermine the legal rights of women.
This man divorced his wife through a text message, sent it 3 times, and that was upheld. It said, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And that divorce was actually upheld as
it was
being
legal.
It was held as legal.
Divorce by text message.
Divorce by text messaging.
Sisters in Islam was set up to defend Malaysian women, not by spurning religion, but by using it to protect them. It stresses those parts of the Quran that recognize the property rights of married women and their right to divorce. Of course, they also have to face the less positive verses.
And yet when you do read the Quran, or maybe selectively read it, you see a lot of things that seem on the face of it to be so anti-women. Is the Quran an impediment for women or a liberation?
You know, if we believed that it was an impediment and if it was that it was discriminatory towards women, we wouldn't be working so hard with it.
Sisters in Islam has put that theory to the test in the lives of women like Ada Melli.
The people who are in charge of disseminating the knowledge of Islam should go back into the Quran and look thoroughly, you know.
In 1988, Ada entered an arranged marriage. For a year or 2, she was happy, but then the abuse began. First psychological and then physical. Her husband banned her from working, driving, and seeing friends. The final straw was his marriage to a second wife. When Ada looked for a divorce, her husband refused, but she fought on, using the Quran as her defense.
When I first knew that he had taken on a second wife, I couldn't stop crying. Then one day after prayers, I turned over a page and glanced upon this verse in the Surah An-Nur.
The Quran became Ada Melli's most powerful ally. Having fired her divorce lawyers, she set out on a lonely struggle through Malaysia's Sharia courts that would last 7 years. She was finally granted a divorce in 2002.
It felt like a whole load of burden went off my shoulders. I was finally free. If there are laws which are causing injustice towards women and children, we need to review them and to see whether is it really Islamic or not.
To the Sisters in Islam, Melly's case says more about their religion than the rhetoric of Muslim leaders. It says Islam can be a force for personal liberation in the modern world, but only when people pay attention to the spirit of the Quran, instead of the man-made rules.
The ultimate contestation then is who has the power to decide which interpretation gets used. And if you look at the wide range of interpretation, right? So you get scholars who say, no, women have to stay at home. There's, you can't go out, you can't wear anything with bells on your feet, you can't wear makeup, and you have to be covered from head to toe and stuff like that. Then you get at the other end scholars who say, no, wait a minute, where did that come from? Because it's certainly not in the Quran. But naturally, those who are at the helm of power don't necessarily like this because it's seen as taking away power, and power is really sweet, and who would want to give it up?
On a journey like this, there are moments you feel there's no Muslim world, just different cultures who share one God. Dia's a rising star of hip-hop. Some call her the Muslim Madonna. She was born in Norway and was still a teenager when her music made her famous. But fame brought condemnation from conservative Muslim scholars and also death threats and abuse. Dia eventually left Norway.
From the land of the free to the jewel of the empire, 'cause the truth only comes from the top of a holy man's fire. From 3 paces back, covered head to toe are the rules just for the masses and written just for show.
I have tried everything. I've considered quitting music. I have tried to compromise in every possible way that I could think of. I've tried to find a middle ground. Every single thing that I seem to do, it seems to get worse every single time. And I mean, I've left countries because of this, and it still seems to follow me.
Hear about the Muslim Madonna, Asian J-Lo, looking for drama. You say so if you're that religious and not trendy clothes, then what you doing even watching video?
How do I justify it? I don't, and I don't have to justify myself and my existence to anybody.
Dia now spends most of her time in the United States. We met up with her in Birmingham. She took a break from promoting her latest album to visit local community projects including a refuge for abused women. Dia's message to her fellow Muslims is clear. The problem with Islam is not the religion, but the customs and cultural baggage it has picked up through history.
Islam and religion and spirituality and faith in general is very, very, very personal, and it has to be honest. Just going through the motions isn't good enough in my eyes, and this is how I was raised and how I was brought up, is that's not good enough. If it's not here and you don't mean it, then don't say it. Don't claim something and just show off that, well, I pray 5 times a day, so that makes me a good Muslim. That is a part of the faith, yes. But in my eyes, if you pray 5 times a day and you go home and you might slap your wife around, to me, those 5 times, you just wash that away. Thank you very much.
That's good, all right, yeah? Am I on TV?
Bye. We're becoming very famous for violence now, and Islam is not about violence. A lot of responsibility, I think, does have to be put on people that claim to be community leaders and religious leaders. I really have to actually say that. Thank you. Do you know which floor it is?
Sorry?
Do you know which floor?
Which floor what, sorry?
The other ratio. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
they're
in
right.
here.
It's just in there. Are you ready to go in now, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, but I have more people coming if that's okay. Times have changed. There are so many things in the Quran that are in there because culturally and the time, that time on earth was different than it is right now. And some of the things applied back then and don't necessarily apply now. And personally, I would not want to live in a society where Sharia law was imposed.
You can stand up, lay down, no, will it be? Will it all be the same again tomorrow? Will it be? You can claim it, but the words are hollow. Will it be? You can stand up, lay down, no, will it be? Will it all be the same again tomorrow?
In the West, Dia looks like a rebel with a cause, but to many Muslims, she's an aberration. The real Islamic trendsetters right now seem to be the revivalists, people like Dr. Heba Esed, a co-founder of Islam Online.
Well, the streets of Cairo and all over Egypt, you do see a revival, don't you, in practice, particularly in the most obvious sense for women and the way they observe Islamic codes of dress. Can she really be equal in society if she's got to wear this badge of identity all the time?
The same question I ask myself when I see young women walking in the cities of Europe that I visit frequently, and they are half naked, they have a lot of tattoos on their bodies, and they are just part of the machine of the consumerist society. And I ask myself the same question: did they really choose this way of life? Are they really aware of what they are doing? Do they really think that this is freedom? Sometimes I feel annoyed by those questions. I mean, what is it all about? It's about a vision of the world. It's about modesty, be humble in what they wear. Each culture has to rethink its own biases.
Sure enough, the most obvious sign of revival on the streets of Cairo is the return to the hijab, the traditional symbol of modesty for women. It's most dramatic in the working-class district of Al-Masala. A generation ago, few Egyptian women cover their head with the veil. Now, in a poor neighborhood like this one, almost every woman does. But for the women of the Segura family, it is as much about keeping up appearances as it is a renewal of faith.
We wear the hijab from a very young age because this is our religion. because we cannot be seen without it. It represents decency, dignity, and respect at the same time.
وقار واحترام في نفس الوقت. بس كفايه كفايه كفايه. اوزني بقى كده. شوفي يطلع نص ربع بعد. لا كله.
Yes, everyone is wearing the hijab now, and no one is showing their hair. I mean, Sarah, my young daughter, started to wear it and she wouldn't take it off.
ما بتقلعوش.
So I like it. No one forced me to wear it.
Yes, of course. Women must wear the veil because we are all well-known feminists here. It is a matter of respect. I am totally committed to this for Islam. We know and listen to the preaching that the women must conform. Her hair must not show, her voice must not be loud. When a man comes home from work, he's tired and hungry and wants a shower.
If I were to change, I would find myself alone. I'd be the only one who's different.
For some Muslim women, the veil feels compulsory, but for others, it's a choice. It's a way of saying that Islam is the only ideal that will not fail you in the modern world. And that conviction is at the heart of the Islamic revival.
Can I move from the hijab to back to this revival as I described earlier on? Why did it happen? Is it political? Is it to do with globalization? What is it? Why did all this happen?
I think it has to do not with globalization, but rather with modernization. And modernity promised, and one of its assumptions was that religion would wither away, individual freedom will take place on massive scale, there will be no religious wars, there will be no war. But all the promises of modernity failed. So I think that there was a backlash somehow against modernity by different cultures. Islam is not unique, so you don't look to Islam as these weird people who are coming back to the religion, reveiling their women and doing some funny things. Actually, you'll find that across the globe and in all sorts of religions, that people want to be reasonable, modern, well-educated, but you want to raise your children to be pious and go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque. Actually, it's very striking that you ask those questions and you did not ask, can people really live without religion?
As the world changes, Islam's becoming more global, more vibrant, but also more divided. It's a battlefield between those who say their religion has to be reformed and those who say it must return to basics. This is no longer a war of ideas. What's at stake is the political destiny of the world's Muslims. And while Western sympathies may instinctively lie with the reformers, the prevailing wind seems to favor the conservatives. Just as Islam emerged from the Middle East, so too has the movement known as political Islam. It sees Islamic revival as a stepping stone to Islamic law and ultimately an Islamic state. It's all summed up in the slogan of the Muslim Brothers: Islam is the solution. The Brotherhood was founded in Egypt 80 years ago to halt the long decline of Muslim power. At various times it's opted for violence and is still linked to militant groups like Hamas. Today, the Brotherhood publicly embraces democracy. In the last Egyptian elections, its candidates won a fifth of all the seats in the parliament. Dr. Akram Shah is one of the rising stars of the Muslim Brotherhood and represents the city of Port Said in the Egyptian parliament. The secret to his success comes not from fighting Egypt's ruling elite, but creating an alternative to it on the margins of society.
Do you know everybody in Port Said?
No. Who can say this? It's a liar.
Yes.
I am not alive.
Where there's a need for a vital service, the Muslim Brothers often step in. This hospital in Port Said, for example, is funded by one of the Islamic charities directly linked to the Brotherhood.
So this is, what is the MRI, is it?
Linear accelerator.
But this is very, very expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
How much would this cost, do you think?
About 10 or 11 million dollars.
Dollars, US dollars?
Yeah.
Okay, that's about 6 million euro.
Exported from USA.
USA, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
USA, made in USA.
In some parts of Port Said, Dr. Akram's power and patronage translate into political stardom. He brings us down the back alleys of his old neighborhood to see the product of decades of neglect. Along with the poverty and chaos, we find an overwhelming desire to be listened to. And when the only one listening is a Muslim brother, Islam becomes the political solution.
Some people are living here. I think that some animals may refuse to live here.
I don't know, it's halfway between cough mixture and small whiskey.
When we finally find a quiet place to talk to Dr. Akram, our government minders sit quietly in the background. Clearly the rise of the Muslim Brothers is a threat to Egypt's ruling elite. In fact, to its many critics, the Brotherhood is a threat to the very notion of democracy. What kind of state does it actually want? What civil rights and personal freedoms would be sacrificed in the name of Islam?
Do you believe in the same democracy that Tony Blair and George Bush believe in?
If the democracy of Blair or democracy of Bush says that homosexuality is prevailing and we will apply it, I think that Allah said against homosexuality. So this is a type of difference between democracy of Blair and the democracy of Islam.
Political Islam is on a roll. Just look at the victory of Hamas in the recent Palestinian elections. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt eventually hopes to repeat that triumph. And through its worldwide network, it sees its influence spreading far beyond the Middle East.
Some in the West think if the Muslim Brothers are in power in Egypt, all women will have to wear the veil and the Sharia will control everything in life. How do you respond?
Islam is a message for all human beings, whether in the West or in the East. I think many people of the West who know well the message of Islam, I think many of them obey it.
See, when you leave the Middle East, there's a question, an overwhelming question that you need answering, and that's, if you're to be a good Muslim, does that mean you have to fight for a Muslim society? Does that mean you got to fight for Islamic law and an Islamic state? And there's very few people that can give you a definitive answer, and we're coming here to London to try and talk to one person who may be able to give that answer. He's a controversial figure. He's been called one of the great innovators of the 21st century. He's also been called one of the most dangerous men in Europe. His name is Tariq Ramadan. His grandfather was the intellectual inspiration behind the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He now lives here in London, and he's probably the most important Muslim scholar in Europe. When we look at Hamas or Hezbollah or the Muslim Brothers, there seems to be this implication at the heart of it all. To be a good Muslim,
you have got to fight for an Islamic state.
No, I think to be a good Muslim, you have to struggle to be consistent between your values and your action. This is what we are saying. This is on the individual ground. Now, what they are saying is that in Islam, you have the principles helping you to reform your society. So some of them were speaking about an Islamic state. For me, the problem is I don't know what an Islamic state is all about. I know what are the Islamic principles helping me to reform my society for the better. So when we speak about political Islam, you have people, they are radicals, they are ready to kill, they are violent. There's one kind. We condemn that. Now you have people coming to an understanding of what Islam is all about, and we have to listen to them. If they don't advocate violence, if they say that we are respecting the law and the legal framework and democracy, let them in and listen.
In the West, it would seem to us that Hamas or Hezbollah or the Muslim Brothers would in some way enforce modesty on women. They would suppress homosexuality, things obviously which again scare the daylights out of a lot of Westerners. Is that what political Islam is about?
No, it's not, and we have to be strict. You know, when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran and they imposed, you know, the headscarf on the women, said, no, this is not this is not Islamic. We cannot just impose, because Islamically speaking, you cannot impose on a woman to wear the headscarf. As according to the human rights, you cannot impose onto her to take it off.
But a lot of people will say there's going to come to a point where, with all the mutual respect and dialogue, we are going to get to that critical point where there will be a fundamental difference about church and state, about the role of religion in public life.
The problem is in our minds, because many Europeans think these Muslims are confusing between religion and public sphere. So at one point there will be a clash. I think that this discourse should be reassessed and rediscussed, because the consequence of this perception could be very damaging for all of us.
It's hard not to despair when you see the depth of suspicion and bitterness generated by the recent row over cartoons of the Prophet. To people like Tariq Ramadan, a key part of the problem is misplaced fear and misunderstanding of political Islam. But on the other side of London, we met Ramadan's polar opposite, Iranian dissident Maryam Namanzi. She believes recent history has given us plenty of good reasons to fear the mixture of politics and Islam.
It's fine for the political Islamic movement to hang girls from city centers, to stone people to death, to impose sexual apartheid. Those are not offensive, but a caricature is offensive. When they're having this dialogue in the West, they're suddenly, you know, they take this position where, you know, try to understand our position. We have a right to these beliefs. My hijab, my right. My faith school, my right. Of course, people have a right to their beliefs. What's happened, though, is that there's a political movement behind it that's using Islam as its banner, and that is imposing the Quran, the Hadith, the Sharia law on people's lives, to the point where we're having women being stoned to death in the 21st century. It's an outrage. Hopefully, we're going to see Islam and political Islam go back into the hole that it belongs in. I'm sorry.
When Islam controls politics, bad things tend to happen. In turn, that feeds rising fears about political Islam. But where East meets West, there's a glimmer of compromise. At the junction of Europe and Asia, Istanbul was the heart of Islam's greatest empire, the seat of the last Muslim caliphate. Today, it's a mass of contradictions. Islam was banished from public life by Turkey's founding fathers, and their secular code is still strictly enforced. But Islam is enjoying a revival here too. And now Turkey's ruled by a party with strong Islamic roots. Journalist and academic Murat Belja has fought for human rights his whole adult life. He was recently put on trial for his outspoken views. He's the last person you'd expect to defend political Islam, and yet he sees signs of hope in Turkey.
You have dangerous, doctrinaire kind of people, Muslim or communist or whatever. when you have an intolerant, undemocratic society. When you have democratic traditions and social flexibility, political flexibility in a country, then political traditions become drawn to the center, so that the doctrinaire political figures are marginalized, and that can only be done through democratic principles. The Turkish experience can be an example.
But in truth, it's still far too early to say that Turkey has struck a lasting bargain between religion and democracy. Many secular Turks fear a rising Islamic tide will gradually overwhelm their Western freedoms. But if the Turkish experiment works, it would be evidence that Islam and politics are not necessarily a recipe for disaster.
You know, you can't deny that the more the modern world collides with the Muslim world, the greater the temptation is to turn to religion for answers. Put at its simplest, that means more people want to be good Muslims in public as well as private. And that has to have an impact on politics in ways that could possibly threaten those of us who put personal freedom above religion. But I've also found that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It is possible, given the right circumstances, the right influences, to square the circle between reform and revival, between Islam and democracy, and between the history of the Muslim world and its future.
But for all the hope on the road ahead, there are also countless dangers, many at the heart of Western life.
You know, I've been born here. I speak the same language without the accent, I think. And I've been to the same schools. I've been taught to read and write just like all the other English people, so to speak. But why am I so different? Why are they treating me so different? Why do I feel as if I have to prove myself?
If America doesn't exist, Islam doesn't exist. There is no other country in the world where you can practice Islam more freely than you can here in America.
I don't think the nuns in St. Catherine's had any clue that I was going to end up a Muslim. They probably wouldn't have been too happy if they'd known that.